Okay. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Can I just have a bit of a thumbs up if everyone can hear me? And yeah, the sound's all good. Yeah, good. Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll kick off. I think it's it's 7 o'clock. It's probably a good time to start. So first of all, I'd like to say welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us this evening. This evening's webinar is kindly hosted by the Business Barn, and the topic that we're covering off is the 3 things that you must consider before starting a rural retail business. My name is Sophie Glanford and I work for the Rural Planning Co. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I know that you're all going to have lots of burning questions that we might not cover off in the content. So if I could ask you to pop your questions into the speech box to the side here, we'll do our best to answer those questions and we'll do that at the end. So just to let you know that the webinar will be available to watch again on our YouTube channel at the Rural Planning Co. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our guest speakers. We've got Ian Bell from Folk to Folk. We've got Mark Ellis from Appetite Me. We've got Angela Cantrell from the Rural Planning Co. And we've got Charlie from the Business Farm. So starting off with you, Mark, I'm going to hand over to you.
Very much. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Mark Ellis. I work for a company called Appetite Me. We're based over on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and we specialise in working with landowners, farmers, country estates, investors, garden centres, developing rural retail. And we basically do everything from the very beginning, identifying sites, feasibility studies, planning, architecture, right through to design, procurement of stock, and getting your farm shop, cafe, restaurant open. And we work all over the UK with various from high up as Aberdeenshire in Scotland down onto the south coast at this current time and over to Wales. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this evening about rural retail and some of the things you need to think about when you move, showing an interest in going into this. So just, these are the kind of projects that people would consider going into. So obviously the core one being farm shops, linking with cafe restaurants, potentially garden centres, nurseries, brewery, distilleries, health and well-being and fitness, artisan food and drink production, independent convenience stores, pop-up market, Airbnb, glamping and camping. So these are the kind of things that we're just going to cover off this evening, but the kind of projects that we get involved with, and obviously other speakers will talk about as well. So this is what we can help you with. So if I have the next slide, please. So, are there still opportunities in rural retail? Yes, there are. There are plenty. We certainly know of many areas in the country that still don't have sufficient farm shops, cafes, or where there's an opportunity to obviously diversify into other areas like we covered in the previous slide. But we need to consider certain things. What is worth doing? Where do I do it? How do I do it? And when shall I do it? And I'm going to try and give you a little bit more idea of the kind of things you need to consider before venturing into this area. So I'll have the next slide, please. Okay. So things you need to consider. So this, for example, this would be potentially a farm shop or cafe, but you could apply this to other diversification products like could be well-being, could be glamping, could be camping. But these are the first questions that we meet our clients when they're talking about a project, what they want to do. So first of all, location. Everything is about choosing the right location within the land you own or the land you're interested in purchasing. It is absolutely key. And primarily, you've got to look at, if you're doing a retail experience, do you have chimney pots in the area or reasonably close where people would travel to you? Then, what land have you got available? What space is available on that land? What buildings do you have available? Because a lot of people have derelict buildings on farms that need renovation, or they have spare capacity within storage buildings, for example, grain stores that they need or they want to diversify into. Next would be road connections and highways. Absolutely vital that you've got good connections to the main road, because if you are off a main road and you're on a country track, the chances of securing planning permission are going to be challenging, but we'll cover that a bit later. Then planning challenges. I'm only going to very quickly mention this. There are many challenges with planning, everything from location, size, where you're going to put this opportunity, what local policies are, etc. We will cover that shortly. Size and scale. How big do you want it to be? what size of the building you want to have, what land you have, and size. You've got to make sure it's the right size. There's no point doing something that's too small. There's no point doing something too big that won't generate you money. So obviously size and scale is key. Funding, how are you going to pay for the project? I think certainly that the challenges that we have over the last few years is, and certainly with the alarming cost increases in raw materials, is how are you going to fund this project? Now, it could be funded from selling assets, selling land. It could be already money that's ready to be invested. There is some grant funding available, not as much as there was. There is more coming through, but that is an option. But you must really consider what funds you have available to complete a project. Who's going to run it? One of the biggest questions we have, and one of the challenges when we meet new clients, is this going to be something that's going to be run by the family? Are they going to employ somebody, or are they simply looking to bring an operator in to run whatever they choose to do? So whether it be a farm shop, whether it be a cafe, whether it be a glamping experience, do you have a member of the family who's really keen and can do it, or is it somebody you're going to need to bring some skills in because you just simply don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the skills, or you may not have the time and you don't want it to get in the way of the mainstream operations that you currently do? Ask the experts. We are all experts here this evening, but there's plenty of people out there who can advise you on financing, planning, architecture, how to operate the business, what the scale of the business should be, what kind of people you should employ. Really, drill into who's out there who can help you do that. Do it differently, a unique offer. I think it's quite important, especially with glamping, for example, now, that if you're going to go into glamping, you need to have something a little bit different, because there's a lot of competition out there now, and people looking for a different experience. It might be an unusual location, it might be an unusual type of habitat, it might be a unique kind of experience where you can do other activities. But it really needs to be thinking about, what could I do differently somebody else is doing local? What are your skill sets? What skills do you bring to the game? Do you have previous retail experience, hospitality experience? What are your customer service skills? Do you like working with the public? Do you enjoy employing additional people? So it's really a looking at self in the mirror and working out, what are our skill sets, and then looking at where your skill sets are insufficient and how you're going to fill that. That then moves on to SWOTs, and I'm going to talk a bit more about SWOTs in a moment. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, but we'll cover that in a moment. Look at your competition. Before we ever start a scheme, we always encourage our clients to look what's in the local area. So normally we'd say, look what's within 15 to 20 miles, but also look regionally. Look within, the county. So for example, where I'm on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, look across Suffolk, look across Norfolk, look who the really good operators are. What can you learn from them? What do they do well? What can you replicate? And also what can you do differently, of course, as well. And then look at how it's going to link in with your current business operation. So for example, if you are on a farm and you're going to do a farm shop, what products have you got that you can push through the farm shop? What other opportunities can you link in? So it might be that you already have some hospitality that can link in with another project. So it's about what can marry up with what you currently do. So they're the kind of things you initially need to consider on when you develop a scheme, whatever it chooses to be. Next slide, please. What makes a successful venture? I'm just going to very quickly go through most of this we've covered, but we've talked about funding, market trends, how things are changing. So farm shops, hospitality, camping, glamping, is growing all the time. So there are still opportunities. We've got, local area relationship. Who can you work with? Who can you work, especially local suppliers, local service providers, linking up with those. Enthusiasm. You have to be enthusiastic. It's all very well, there is a need, but there also needs to be enthusiasm from you, your team, your family, to actually really want to go out and do it, because most of what we're suggesting here tonight is customer facing. Building design and layout, absolutely key. We often find, there are great architects out there, but they need to work with the experts who understand retail, who understand what the public is looking for. So when you do get that building designed, it is going to meet what you need. And then customer service. Customer service is absolutely key. It will make or break your business. You can have the most beautiful building, you can have the best products, but if your service is poor and people aren't delivering high expectations and high delivery of standards, people will not come back. Okay, next slide, please. SWOT, so strength, weaknesses analysis. This is something we do with our clients, and I've broken this down into, I would recommend doing 3 SWOT analysis. The first one, take your idea. So your idea is to build a cafe out in the countryside. You've got a great location. So then do, these things. So look at the strengths, the characteristics of the business which give it advantages over its competitors. So a strength might be great location, fantastic building. Opportunities, elements in a company's external environment that allow it to formulate and implement strategies to increase profitability. So it could be that there's opportunities, there's nothing else in the area, people are crying out for it, people want somewhere to go. That would be that. Weakness, characteristics of the business which make it disadvantaged relative to competitors. So it could be that there could be a potential that staffing could be a problem. It could be a lack of funding and investment. It could be lack of experience. And then threats, elements to an external environment that could endanger the integrity, profitability of the business. An example of that could be a new road network going in, and it could obviously divert traffic away from your site, as an example. So, like I say, first of all, do a SWOT on your idea. Look at that. Then do a SWOT on yourself and your family, the people who are going to be involved in that project. Really look at, what, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities are, and really be honest and brutal about yourselves and really understand, especially where your weaknesses are, where you're going to have problems. And then thirdly, once you've done that, then go out and look at your competition. So if it is, for example, you're going to set a farm shop up, identify the competitors in the 15 to 20 mile radius, visit each one and complete, the document again, and really dig deep into each one and understand, what they're good at, what they're not. And then you can then pull together a potential idea that will obviously help you develop your scheme. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So this is just an example of one that we've just done recently for a project. I'm not going to go through every line, but we'll just look at, for example, the strengths. So these are the strengths of a particular farm. So they've got a great location. It's going to be planning positive. We've already had that identified. They have a mixed arable and dairy farm, so there's opportunities to link in with that. The current site provides an excellent rural location with beautiful views. Great transport routes. It's right on a main A road. Site provide new services for both locals and further afield. There's very little around. Sufficient space for parking. That's always a key thing to consider. And you've got space, for enough parking. And also, as the business grows, is it future-proofed? There's an existing cheese factory that wish to reopen. So again, it's something that will link with the development of farm shop. And we're going to start developing our own cheese brand. We're going to start making ice cream, yogurt. So again, that's a real strength of the cohesion into the farm shop. And then there's a number of outbuildings that are available that we can use for other things like farm tools, storage, educational. And then there's a large investment capital pool available for the project. So again, that's good. But these are the kind of things, examples of the kind of things you should be drawing out from when you do your 3 SWOT analysis within that. Okay, next slide, please. Feasibility studies. Okay, so once you've done your SWOT analysis and you've done everything and you've got this information together, certainly Appetite Me, we can offer you a very in-depth feasibility study that really looks deeply into your project, and then listed here is all the things that we would cover. A feasibility study normally takes 10 to 12 weeks to complete. A team of people will be working this. They would do site visits, do lots of research, pulling all the data together that would then generate a report that covers all these. And the key things in here are going to be things like the design process, the financial projections, what the 5-year budget looks like, what the design of the project is going to be, a real in-depth review of what the competition is, local demographics, look at the potential sites, because often we have projects and you may well have multiple sites you want to consider. So we look at all the sites in relationship with the planners, with the architects, to work out what's going to be the best site to, 1, deliver the project, and 2, that's going to get planning. And we also do traffic surveys, traffic flows. So you have a document you can then take forward that can be used for planning, it can be used for financing, it can be used for going to the planning authority, great tool for using for grant funding, persuading family members or trustees. So everything is in one book that people can then use to decide, do we take this idea forward? And as a percentage of the total cost of a project is very, very small. Next slide, please. And then just, one final thing to think about. Are you capable of running a retail enterprise? We've covered most of this, but these are just things, again, when you're doing your SWOT, do you like working with the public? Remember, most of these are a 7-day-a-week operation. Do you have the backing and the family support for the project? Remember time. These projects take a long time. They're not usually overnight. We are talking months, if not several years from fruition to delivery. Think about, you're in an environment involving food hygiene, food labeling, health and safety, HR. Do you enjoy working with the local community? That's an absolute must. Your skill set and managing a team. So these are the things you need to consider, when you first think of your idea. Do you really want to get into this? Because if you ask those questions on there and look at that, and it's all positive, then great. If it's not, how are you going to deliver that? Okay, thank you. That is it. Okay, I will now hand you over to Ian.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. We get on to my presentation. Okay. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Ian Bell. I'm Head of Farming and Rural Engagement for Folk to Folk. And it's a pleasure to be talking along with colleagues tonight. We know Hannah and the business barn very well, and we do a lot of work with Mark. It's good to be part of this evening, because if looking at the three things you must have to consider, one has to be finance. And as Mark's already said, there's a lot of projects now have to be quality, and the fact they have to be quality means that they can often need a considerable input of capital to get them going. So at Folk to Folk, our aim is to help rural business seeking finance to grow, develop and diversify. Thanks, Sophie. And we've been in business for just over 9 years. And in December 2001, we reached the mark, the cumulative lending mark of £500 million. Since then, we've lent another in excess of 30 million. And we've done that with no customer losses, which we're very proud of, and a fact we want to sustain. At this point, I just need to explain to you I'll give you an overview of how Folk to Folk works, because I know we're concentrating on borrowers tonight, but there are investment opportunities. But I just want you to understand how our lenders and borrowers interact, because that will have some bearings on how we make decisions about which projects to fund. So we're not a bank, we are a lending platform. And on one side of our platform, we have our lenders, which are people like you and me, who have a minimum of £20,000 to invest for a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 5 years. For that, they receive 6.5% interest, which is paid monthly. There are no fees, and their lendings are secured against property and land up to a value of 60% loan to value. Then on the other side of the platform, we have our borrowers. Our borrowers borrow a minimum of £100,000, minimum of 6 months, maximum of 5 years, to match in with the lender. 6.5%, which all goes to the lender. And then we have as a setup fee and an annual management fee, and again secured against 60% loan to value. And that relationship, if you like, think of us as the matchmaker. We're there to manage that relationship, and crucially, it is the lender who decides what they want to lend their money for, and I'll come on to that again a bit later. So Sophie, please. So we're not a bank, so we don't have a prescriptive list of things that we want from potential borrowers. So we don't want 3 years accounts. We don't want 5-year cash flows. We take a holistic approach to assessing borrowers. So we'll look at the business as a whole. Yeah, we understand that if you're going into, say, for Mark example, going into that farm shop, we understand that you've got to build the business. We understand there won't be the cash flow in the first 12 months or the first 2 years. So we appreciate all that. What we do need is to see a serviceability, because we want to see that you can afford to borrow the money from us. And I add, we're all interest-only loans. So again, that takes pressure off a business in those early days without having to find repayment from the word go. So it's all interest only for the duration. And then the crucial thing is that we want to see sufficient security and quality security. They are the key golden assets, if you like, to what we're looking for. Thank you, Sophie. So we're not a bank, so you don't have to fit a bank criteria with us, but it's surprising how many businesses we see and work with that don't fit that basic criteria which the traditional lenders now require, and some things that they impose which make it absolutely impossible for businesses to lend. So if I'll expand on that in the next slide. So these are the common challenges that we see facing rural businesses. You're diversifying into something new. You have unusual and or diverse income streams. Age, you don't meet standard lending criteria. Your lender requires evidence of a track record of earnings. And I'll come on to the grant one in just a moment. So let me take the scenario of a farm and take Mark Swat. This is an arable dairy farm who are going to diversify into a farm shop. So your traditional funder is very happy dealing with your business as a farmer. When you suddenly announce that you want funding to go into retail, where you have no experience, and it's a completely new business one, then the cautiousness starts to come on. And we appreciate, in the first few years, it's going to be an unusual income, and you haven't got that evidence of a track record of earnings from that one particular business. So it's quite common for folk to help in those very early stages of development of a farm shop. So we can help get the shop built, we can help get it established, we can help getting it trading. And then quite common for us is that once the traditional lender who's already involved in your business can see the building, he can see it working, he can see some evidence of cash flow, you can prove you can show the number of credit card payments you're taking, various factors like that, and then they become the exit strategy for us. So they will absorb that lending into the core business of the farm, and then that becomes our route out and our lender's route out. Age, there are a lot of people in this country over the age of 70 quite capable of running a business and still have a lot of ambitions to run a business, and we see quite a few of them. And again, it's not a negative for us. Just looking at that funding up front, there are occasions I think the last major one was the leader funding, where there are some quite substantial grants available to farming businesses, rural businesses. But the drawback with most of them, you have to do the project first. You've got to fund the whole project first before you can draw down that grant payment. So we will fund the entire project. Obviously, dependent on security you've got, and you're still within the 60% loan to value, and so you can get the project done. You can get the grant element done. Then once you get the grant funding in, you can do a partial redemption and reduce your borrowing from us. But it does enable you to get hold of that funding, and that there are other schemes in play at the moment, and I suspect more will emerge. But it is a way of you actually being able to access that funding, that grant funding. So thank you, Sophie. We're seeing a rural renaissance. We're seeing a lot of people wanting to get into business, into rural businesses, and Mark's already touched on a lot of these things, but as adding value to food, venturing into leisure and tourism, expanding into retail, moving into hospitality, investing in renewables, providing a service. I mean, these are all things that you know, but we are seeing a demand for funding for these types of venture. Mark's already touched on, is there opportunity out there? There is a lot of opportunity. And personally, I think because of COVID, that's probably increased the opportunity. And certainly coming on to the staycation and that, looking at the cost of cheap flights, I don't think cheap flights exist anymore. And I can still see that demand, a demand for business. There are business opportunities out there which are still open to people. Thanks, Sophie. A few things that we've done, and I'll just, as a few pointers of the circumstances that we've helped in. I've got some friends who farm up in Yorkshire, and when I'm with them, I often say, "God, what amazing view you've got from the farm." And the response from one dear friend is, "You don't live off the view." Well, this is Roddy in the picture here, and Roddy has got a small farm which overlooks the Vale of York, and he could live off the view, and he's developed his glamping pods, quality, real top quality glamping pods which overlook this fantastic view of the Vale. He used to have some sheep and he used to have some cattle, but they've gone, and he now has llamas. And again, it's another add-on attraction to get people to come. And he's very clever at marketing, and so he's developed his site as the private view, as a unique place going. And just touching on the retail, he's also got a retail arm in this, because he's selling meat packs from local farmers, beer packs from the local brewery. He's integrated a lot of retail into what is essentially a leisure and tourism business. Thank you. Farm retail. This is one example where we've helped, and an interesting reason for doing it. And Mark knows this business well. So this was a small dairy farm wanting to add value to milk. So they started selling raw milk at the back door. Simple as that. And that led to the customer base growing, and the customer base saying, well, why can't we buy more things from you? Why can't we get fruit from you? Why can't we get meat from you? Coupled with local farmers and producers who were saying, well, you know, do you want to sell things for us? And all that has accumulated, and then driven, if you like, the creation of the farm shop. an interesting one from the borrowing perspective. This family had never previously borrowed money, so they had no credit history. And that, again, that's just one of the quirks that you can come across in the mainstream. Next, please. And just, I think equine is just worth mentioning as well. We're living in a much more crowded environment now, and we're seeing people, particularly in the southeast, where horse riding is very popular, but the problems of traffic makes it very difficult to find safe places to ride. The small farms in the village, which would perhaps let you have a pony in a paddock, rent a couple of stables, have gone. And there does seem to us to be, again, room in this business for some expansion and still quite a few opportunities. Thank you. So our borrowers, who are our borrowers? Our borrowers are farmers, food producers, property renovators, developers, country hotel owners, manufacturers, all types of retail. Of simple must is all our borrowers have to have land or property against which to secure the loan, but we will not, for obvious reasons, take their principal home for security. They must be based in the UK. We operate across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They must be over 18 and they must pass our AML, money laundering, credit and reputational checks and have a borrowing requirement of 100,000. And just to add, we are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and obviously we have to we obey and adopt all their recommendations and rules. Thank you, Sophie. I think we've got one more. So just as a resume, if you like, to conclude with, so folk to folk, we offer fixed interest only loans for almost any business purpose you can think of, from £100,000, from 6 months to 5 years. Typically our rates are 6.5% per annum, and our loan to value is a maximum of 60% loan to value. Thank you, Sophie. I think that's enough for everybody to digest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, on to Angela now.
Thanks, Ian. I'll try and start my slides. Can everyone see that? No?
Just see your screen at the moment with all your up.
Here we go. Bear with me a sec. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Let me just get the display settings. They have, give me a second. Okay. Let me just move. Okay, guys. So hi, I'm. Can you see that? Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. So hi everyone. I'm Angela Cantrell. I'm a planning consultant and rural charter surveyor for the Rural Planning Company. I'm stepping in for Hannah today because she's unable to make it, unfortunately. So just here to talk about one of the important aspects to consider before starting your retail business. Last but by no means least, planning consent for whatever you're planning to do. So a little bit about Hannah. Firstly, Hannah is a rural child surveyor and planning consultant. She started the firm as a firm of rural child surveyors about 10 or so years ago, and then decided to specialise into planning. And now she is a director of the rural planning company. She farms with her husband in Worcestershire, and is heavily involved in the rural community. I am, as I mentioned, a rural child surveyor and planning consultant. I also farm with my husband in Shropshire, and again, pretty heavily involved in the farming. So we have a good team of agricultural specialists and rural specialists within the firm. There's currently about 12 of us within the team. With our planning applications, we generally have a great success rate, and all of the team are really sort of normal. We're pretty informal, and obviously professional, but we just like to give sort of sensible and no nonsense advice. So just thought I'd cover some planning basics around food retail. So whatever you're planning to do, whether you're selling food or other retail aspects on farm, this retail is a commercial activity, and therefore if you do want to erect any buildings, you will need a planning permission to do that, erect the building or any additional works. If you're looking to reuse a building for that use, you'll need a planning permission for a change of use. Generally, agriculture is favoured in terms of planning. The planning policies are generally quite generous. However, planning consent for retail is pretty different. There'll be some relatively straightforward projects and some others very challenging, and some very much in between. And we'll just cover some. I'd just like to raise any just aspects which you might want to consider, any red flags that might make an application much more difficult. Also, how to do your own basic research in preparation for a planning application, and also what specifically is involved in a planning application. So you'll all be familiar with this chap. I think when you're considering undertaking a retail development, you certainly need to be in a certain mindset and mind frame. You've got to obviously be relatively good with people. I think that when we did the slides, yeah, the waiting hour, the waiting times to get into Clarkson's farm shop was 3.5 hours. So you can imagine the amount of people that were kicking around on that day. So I think, just think about the planning impact that might be applicable in the area that you're looking to develop. If when you're thinking about your planning application, do talk about all of the positive stuff, big up the benefits of the proposal, but also if there are any issues or potential challenges, just deal with those head on before you start, and think about the way that a local planning authority would assess the application as a set of scales, and generally we find it our job to tip the balance to demonstrate that any proposal that you're putting forward, the benefits outweigh any perceived harm. So the three main red flags are flooding. If you're in flood zone 1, you're really unlikely to get any issues arising However, if you are within flood zone 2 or 3, you really need to seek advice before going any further. And generally you can search for your flood zones on the .gov website, tap your postcode in, and it should bring up the flood zones for you to be able to identify your site and where that sits in any flood zones. Another major red flag, particularly when you're talking about a significant increase in traffic, is highways, and really essentially, can you achieve safe highway access? If you're not sure, then I think it's really useful to front load an application and get specialist advice before you make a start. Also, if the site is in within the green belt, I think it's really useful just to take some advice initially, because the green belt sets a very high bar in respect of any planning application, and particularly anything relating to new build or new development. So I think it's really useful to do some research. Again, magic maps are quite useful. Tap in your postcode and see whether your site fits within the green belt designation, and then just consider that further by taking some professional advice. So in order to make sure you have the best chances of getting planning, there's some really good essential basic research you can do to get your ducks in a row. If these initial 3 red flags come back with anything, then obviously get some further advice. Assuming they're okay, then you'll need to work out whether your local planning authority might support your application. And really, it's just a case of breaking that down into two main things. Firstly, is the principle of development is acceptable in line with planning policy and neighbourhood development plans and the like, and also secondly, if there are any technical issues. So for instance, any aspects, for instance, highways or ecology or drainage, that sort of thing. The quickest way to look up other applications to do your research is to look at obviously look at comparable applications through your local authority website. You can often tap in a search keyword on their website and search other applications. You can often find similar examples, and I would look up anything that's comparable and look at the planning officer's report, which will give a good précis of how they've assessed similar applications, and then you can take lots of hints from those applications to then prepare your own. So in order to really assess whether local authorities might be supportive, look at their local planning policies. Often planning authorities prefer a change of use for existing buildings as opposed to a new build building. Or a new build site. They often restrict what can be sold in a shop or from site. They can also restrict where the food or produce comes from. We've had one recently where I think nearly 80% of the produce needed to be sold. 80% of the produce needed to be within 20-25 miles of the farm shop. So that's just something to be aware of, a potential restriction. As a general rule of thumb, the change of use of buildings is usually easier, an easier planning consent to achieve, perhaps with the addition of some new build. Vending machines are usually supported by local planning authorities. Cafés and tea rooms and restaurants, generally small scale, they are normally supported. Larger schemes and farm shops can be a lot more work and a lot more involved. but it's really, again, about providing that balance where you can demonstrate that there are a significant amount of jobs created, and economic benefits are there, and any other technical detail hopefully can be overcome. Then hopefully the local planning authority should see the balance being tipped in favour of that application. So the larger the scheme, the more input you're going to need. The smaller the scheme, the less input you're going to need generally. For smaller projects, you still need to set out the benefits for your vending machines and your smaller farm shops, for instance. If there's no issues relating to those, then it might just be as simple as preparing a simple planning statement to set out exactly what you want to do and demonstrate the benefits. If there's something more larger scale, then it might be something that you'd look to provide some additional information on highways or transport, for instance, or even heritage and ecology, particularly if you're converting any heritage buildings or traditional buildings. So in terms of how to move your project forward, you'd be looking to really assess and do your research. So in order to do that and keep costs down, really it's probably quite useful to undertake your own planning research in the first instance. For larger projects, it's a really good idea to take professional advice from the start to really get a handle on what the implications of the planning application might be, and also to provide you with an indicative budget. You don't really have to go straight in for a planning application or even a pre-application inquiry. Most planning consultants will offer an initial planning feasibility, and generally we do that at a cost from about £300 plus VAT. As I say, we and often other planning consultants do budget for the whole project, so that will take into account planning fees, statutory planning fees, which the local planning authority charge, and any other third-party consultants which might need to be employed. And if you do engage a planning consultant, generally they coordinate and manage the whole process for you, and effectively hold your hand through the whole process. Alternatively, you could just engage a planning consultant to help you write key documents, for instance, planning statements and retail statements. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Angela. That's brilliant. Thank you, everybody. We've got some great questions, which I'd like to pose to you all now, if that's okay. I think the first one we'll kick off with is, I think this one is aimed at Mark, actually. How much would you charge for a feasibility study, please?
A feasibility study, it's very difficult to put a price on it. They're very variable. For a basic feasibility study, we could be talking about 5 to 6K going upwards. And then we tailor each one to what the client wants, depending on the content. So it goes up in scale.
Right. And then another question that we've got actually is, can we apply all of these points to an equestrian setting? For example, an equestrian holding that wanted to diversify into trekking, or I think for visitors to come and stay with their horses potentially. Is this something that you could all help with?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our point of view, we've worked with, last year we worked with an equestrian centre who's looking to roll out additional diversification. So certainly from our point of view, we look at that. And we also introduce them to other concepts that they may have not thought about that could add additional income as well.
And Ian, is that, you mentioned earlier that equestrian holdings were absolutely open for your range of business. Is that correct? I don't know whether Ian can hear us. Okay, we'll pose that to Angela then. Where do we sit with equestrian advice?
So equestrian use, from a planning point of view, would need planning consent. If your horses are grazing, generally they don't need consent to do that. They are still livestock at that point. As soon as you start sort of creating equestrian facilities, cross-country jumps, show jumping ring, things like that, on grassland, for instance, you would need a change of use generally, and obviously for the installation of anything, for instance, menage, gallops, the use of agricultural buildings for stables, then that would need a change of use also.
Can I also ask Ian? Ian, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Excellent. Ian, could you tell me what is the typical time span from the approach to folk to draw down of funds? You know, what can the customer expect when they approach you in terms of the funding timescales?
We always say weeks, not months, and really it's up to the potential borrower. The sooner we can get information together, the sooner we can make a decision. And we can, there are some stages in it. One will be that we have to take evaluation of the security, but we've got a panel which deal with that efficiently. So yeah, it's very difficult. Don't tie me down to how many actual number of days I do it, because I can't do that. But no, we do get on with it. As soon as we've got all the information together, we have an in-house credit committee which would review it, and they can be called anytime, any day to look at the individual cases. What we can also do, though, at this stage where you're planning things, we can give you indicative costs. So say you're working with Hannah and Mark, and you've got a good idea of what figure you're going to be looking at and for how long, then we'll very happily give you indicative costs of what that would be. Absolutely no obligation whatsoever. So at least you can feed that into your planning, and see if it's feasible or not.
Great, thank you. And also, similar question posed to you, Mark. From a sort of global point of view, what can the client expect in terms of time span for developing a farm shop from start to finish? Roughly, what are we talking about?
I would probably say it depends what your planning permission authority is like. That's going to be the longest process. But on average, I would probably say from that initial scheme process development through to putting the key in the door opening, I would say at least 18 months to 2 years, probably 2 years plus, depending on the scale of the scheme. If you had if you've got class Q permission class R permission to change of use of building, that would speed it up dramatically. But I would say as a rule, 18 months to 2 years.
Brilliant, brilliant. And finally, Angela, can I ask you whether it's always worth approaching your parish council or local councillor ahead of commencing your project?
I think that probably depends on whether you get on with your parish council or your local ward member, your county councillor, and also the attitude to the local authority to their comments. Often with a larger scheme, I think it's certainly worthwhile getting them on board and talking to them about what you want to do initially. Yeah, most certainly, and more than likely the parish council as well. For smaller schemes, maybe not so much. I mean, it's always great to have some community involvement, I would suggest. So yes, it could potentially be beneficial. Yeah.
Well, I think we're pretty close to wrapping things up, unless there's any other questions or any other points that either of you would like to make before we close up. No. Just to let the audience know, all of this information and our contact details are available. So if any of you want to come to us with your projects and want to talk about them in more detail, we're very, very happy to help with initial consultations that are taking place without any charge. So please do get in touch, and we're very, very happy to help you.
Yeah, that's the same with us at Appetite Me. You know, we're more than happy. We normally, as a rule, come out first time. We'll come out to site, spend half a day with a client free of charge, and just talk about the project and dig into what they want to do before any commitment is made, which I think is key.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.